In this video, we're going to look at a green ink by Sailor, their Kobe number 15. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Also, down in the description is a link to the green ink playlist, so if you wanted to see more, you can find that there. I'm an ink guy, and let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, very nice shading in the extra fine, very nice shading in the medium. Now the medium is a little bit darker than the extra fine, and the stub is a lot darker than everything on the page. The extra fine took 12 seconds to dry while the medium took 18. Scrubby for both don't really show a lot of color variation, but it definitely shows itself very well in the writing. Smear test says you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then a Sailor 1911 with a zoom nib was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. No bleeding, but some ghosting going on this very thin paper. No feather, no spread. We don't get any shading in the stub. We do get a few spots of it that show up in the extra fine, and we definitely see some of it in the medium. Now the medium is a tad darker than the extra fine, and the stub is much darker than everything on the page. Extra fine took 19 seconds to dry while the medium took 25. Scrubby for both give no color variation, though it is definitely in the writing, and the smear test I do not think you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down, and then it's put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this very light blue at the bottom. Now it's immediately forming a line and pushing up. Then we get this very nice green, but at the very top of this green, we see what appears to be a very similar to the first blue, but for as much as it's moving, it has to be a different one. The one on the right is let dry for 10 minutes before it's dunked into water. And we see that the blue forming a line at the bottom is much darker, much more there, really showing that that blue might be a little bit more of a resistant tone. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. No bleeding, no ghosting. We have no feather, spread, no shading. The stub has zero shading. The extra fine does have some shading. The medium has none. So the only shading we really get is a slight peppering of it in the extra fine. Now the extra fine is much lighter than the medium, and the medium is much lighter than the stub. Extra fine took 14 seconds to dry while the medium took 19. Scrubby for both give no color variation, but we only get a light peppering of it in the extra fine. Smear test says you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing. Looking at the highlighter, that lowercase h immediately grabs my attention for being completely blown out. I'm not willing to lose 25% of what I'm writing, which is the way that first makes me feel. I'm just not losing my notes. Water is reactivating and lifting most all of this ink off the paper. You start to see some of the white of the paper showing through, and that makes perfect sense considering it only took water to get this out of my pen. Now, pen flush does everything that water does and nothing more, because you can't do more than completely remove it. And the 1/3 bleach solution, while it is completely removing it, it is turning a bunch of it kind of blue. There was blue in the chromatography. The next writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia paper. Not done to see any kind of performance change, but much more to see tone change as it would go on. And I was really curious how this yellow would react with the blue tones in the chromatography. And the thing is, in the medium, no difference. In the stub, no difference. In the extra fine, it just looks a little bit lighter as a tone. It's only a little lighter. Not that I think you're really using green ink in a professional environment on yellow paper, because if you're using green ink, they probably don't have a problem with if it alters tones some. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Sailor Kobe's number 15 has a viscosity of 2.35, so it's normal. If you're interested in how the viscosity test's done and all of that kind of stuff, then there's a link to that video down in the description. The next writing sample is done on life paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, light shading in the medium, nice shading with the extra fine. Now the extra fine is tremendously, loads lighter than the stub, and the medium is only slightly lighter than the stub. The extra fine took 11 seconds to dry, while the medium took 17. Scrubby for both aren't showing any color variation, but it shows itself very nicely in the extra fine writing. The smear test says you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Sailor Kobe's number 15 has an average dry time of 18 seconds, so it's normal. The last writing sample is done on Levenger paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, no shading in the medium. Now, both of those come out as the same tone. The extra fine, that is certainly lighter than the stub, and the medium, a couple of spots. I don't really want to call it full shading, but there is peppering of dark spots that does occur. Now, the extra fine took 10 seconds to dry, and the medium took 14. Scrubby for both give no color variation, although you do get that light peppering of color in the extra fine. And the smear test you could probably recover if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like Sailor Kobe's number 15, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I decided to go with a orange ink by Noodler's, their Summer Tanager. If you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of Sailor Kobe's number 15? The gentle shading in and out is really nice. I also like the dark solid green you can get. I see a bottle of this being used up very fast. It is a great tone of green. So what nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? If you really want that darker tone, then go with a really wet broad. Put it down, really let it be seen for the beauty this dark green gives you. But if you want the shading, a medium flow fine stands out amazing, and that's based on a majority of the writing samples showed the writing having better shading with the fine. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video we're going to take a look at KWZ's Brown number 2.